Hello, I'm Curtis O'Dell, the Sales Manager for the Americas for Tricentis Tosca Data Integrity, DI, our data quality testing offering.
And this is Jonathan Murrah. I'm a senior solution architect at Tricentis. I've been with the company over 7 years now, and I'm happy to be joining our talk today to be able to discuss with you all about cloud data migration and share some of the key points we've learned with our customers in their journey migrating to the cloud. Some quick housekeeping. You can type in your questions into the panel throughout the actual session. We have some time set aside at the end where we'll go through and answer all your questions that we get. If we don't get to yours, we'll follow up with you by email, and our recordings are available after. You can find them in this location you can see on the screen. Curtis, I'll leave it to you to get us started.
Today we're going to talk about on-prem to cloud data migrations, some of the key challenges and best practices for performing them, and then my friend Jonathan is going to dive a little deeper into some of the unique considerations for Snowflake and SAP S/4HANA specifically. He will also give a quick overview of how Tosca DI can be a huge benefit in your data migration projects and beyond. A little about Tricentis. Tricentis is the world leader in continuous testing and advanced automation with over 1,800 worldwide customers, supporting over 160 different technologies, and we are partnered with all the major global and regional SIs. We are privileged to have the top companies representing the major industry verticals utilize our software for their data quality testing. From the data testing perspective, we see these business use cases the majority of the time. Data integration testing, source into the data processes at different organizations, data migration testing, which we're going to focus on today, and related to both end-to-end data testing. Of course, geospatial data mining and fraud and abuse data integrity are top of mind for all the industries we serve today. These are the technical challenges we need to address. The two most important ones to me are Agile and DevOps practices are now requiring we speed up testing, and our automation does that, and the end-to-end testing that is needed to make sure we achieve the coverage needed with our testing. We can't go any faster and sacrifice coverage. We have to make sure that our automation allows you to go faster, but also with more coverage. Two of the main reasons that you're looking to migrate to the cloud are speed and cost. Good reasons. You're doing the right thing. I've even tried here to recreate the slide Amazon's Andy Jassy had at a recent Amazon conference where he was making the point the Oracle and IBM boxes wouldn't fit in the Amazon delivery truck. Interesting stuff. But in the end, your data testing must keep up with the scale and pace of these new cloud environments. It's no good to move to them if you can't test with that same velocity. The way to do this is we need to make sure and look at this from migration and ongoing. We, of course, test the upgrading and migration of data, and then ongoing to make sure that we can, in an automated fashion, test across all the data layers as changes are made in those new migrated to systems. The tests that we need to look at are pre-screening, where we test at the source, format checks, row counts. This has to do with data quality, making sure that the data is ready to move to the next layer. Vital checks and field tests as we move from left to right. Typically not going to have a lot of transformations present at that point, but it's used to quality check much faster than a full validation and reconciliation. Vital checks that can be extracted automatically from metadata. Fast creation is the result, especially in metadata-centric platforms like Snowflake. And field tests that require knowledge of the business logic and understanding of the mappings. Those are the kind of tests that we look on as we move across. Reconciliation as we get closer to 3, where we're looking at full comparison between two data sets. and use when transformations are present and when you need to look at every row and row by row. And report and visualization testing. Test the contents of the reports, making sure whether it's a HTML-based report, web service, Excel, compare that report data with the operational data sources that feed into it. And then ongoing monitoring, making sure that we can fulfill SLAs by monitoring and making sure that everything is running properly, and making sure that as data enters improperly, we can profile that data and immediately stop. Let's look at some of the challenges and best practices you should consider in your data migration. Well, today we're going to dive into the details of data migrations. We're going to focus on the testing and acceptance tests highlighted here. And we'll focus on the details of some of the other steps that may have testing related components to them. Lower level planning tasks is where we're going to focus today. Number one, you must quantify the risk of not testing to the consequences values. For one example, if you are 20% slower in the migration process due to lack of testing, then 20% of the cost of the migration is at additional cost risk. You must also be able to include testing from the start in your planning processes, including defect reporting, incident handling, staff training with clear roles and responsibilities, managing, configuring the test environments, and of course, all the entrance and exit criteria needed to make this a successful project. Don't just start moving data over. You must have a plan to perform the migration and verify it is correct. Most organizations start with a certain group, and then it follows with another group, and before long, you really just have a mess in the new environment. I have some tips on the planning process later in the slides, but it's imperative that you start by cleaning up the data for cloud migration. Moving valueless data is not only a waste of time and money, it costs you by extending the time it takes to get all your data moved. Cloud providers are limiting the amount of data you can move at once, and tranches is the most common way. For example, if you're only able to move so many gigabytes a day, you cannot waste pipeline time on data that is valueless. You must build comprehensive data dependency and security matrices. These can be built automatically in most cases. Most MDM tools can help assist in that. Build into these matrices, though, priority based on business value. Of course, start with smaller subset as a pilot or a proof of concept, but move your migration immediately to the processes that probably pushed you to migrate in the first place, your important business data processes. Overlay that plan with your mapping and environments. Check these against the common 48 data quality measures and make sure the processes and the testing environments cover from the lowest level schema all the way up to the reporting levels. We won't cover all this in detail here, but these are the general data quality tasks that all data quality is measured against. You need to be reconciling and validating against all of these. And note, you just can't do this manually. You can't achieve good coverage for all these general testing metrics in a manual fashion. Coverage of 10 to 20% is probably the best you can achieve manually. This again goes back to my first slide on quantifying risk. In this case, the risk associated with low coverage. You also must think about the ability to provide value in the old and the new data systems during transition and then obviously afterwards. If the data analytics reporting and extracts do not reconcile before to the old, during on both, and after on the new systems, you must determine that before the business units can trust the data and get value from it. You cannot perform this synchronization with the manual process. Hopefully you've seen one consistent theme in these slides. Do not manually test. To take you deeper into some of these considerations for Snowflake and SAP HANA, I'm going to bring in Jonathan to give you some deeper insight.
Great, thanks, Curtis. So as we mentioned, migrations are not a simple lift and shift. So we want to have a look at some of the key points to consider when migrating to Snowflake and S/4HANA. And we want to point out some of the checks or tests that should be done based on our customer experience. Let's have a look at Snowflake first, and here's 3 important points that should be considered. Usually we have an Active Directory security model, and as we move on to Snowflake, we now have to work with a more role-based setup. This is different, so we need to have Active Directory versus role-based tests set up as part of our testing. For example, we need to make sure that the people on premise with their Active Directory security can't access areas within Snowflake once they've been migrated. The next point is that Snowflake has its own unique metadata compared to what we see in other data warehouses. There's a lot more metadata in Snowflake, so we need to verify that these new parts in Snowflake are correct, as this can impact performance. But all this new metadata is good, because since we now have physical data stored in micro partitions and the logical pointers to that data is in the metadata, this gives us some great new capabilities, like the time travel feature, which we can leverage and take advantage of in our testing. Which takes us to our next point. When we look at regression, we can now spot the changes that happen between Snowflake in the staging area and the final resting place using this time travel function. And to go even further, we can now have the ability to use the undrop command together with the time travel to revert back to previous states when we find issues without needing to contact DBAs and getting them involved, which I think is pretty cool. Now let's have a look at S/4HANA. SAP promotes migrating finance data first, and 80% of customers will do just that. And because finance data has really the most impact, it has to be the most accurate. End-to-end testing of that finance data will ensure that the data is accurate. New processes like SLT, which is SAP's kind of ETL process when it's moving the data to HANA, has been a common failure point in migrations. So we must test all of this. And one thing that most people miss is that HANA is in the SAP Business Warehouse. But this is just part and not all of the data that finance reports use. So again, we need to test end-to-end, covering all data sources in your landscape, not just SAP. So here's one way we can help in S/4HANA migrations. This is a specific set of tests for SAP SLT we at Tricentis developed that we call SLT health checks. You can see it consists of a number of validations and reconciliations from the source to target as you're doing your migration. The SAP HANA SLT process is pivotal and complex, and we are the only company that can fully test it, and by creating these SLT health checks, we ensure that the process is functioning properly in production. Looking at this architecture, we need a new data process for a successful SAP HANA Central Finance implementation. And Curtis actually has a great example of where a large oil and gas customer came to realize this. Curtis?
Yes, as the data was moved from SAP ECC to HANA, there's an important synchronization that has to happen between SAP Central Finance, CFIN, and the Enterprise Data Hub or warehouse at the company. 25% of the data is in HANA, the other 75% is outside of HANA. While the ECC to HANA migration may be a simple process in some cases, the ability to test that the SAP and non-SAP data is in sync for them was paramount. Before our testing, they had 1,000 controllers spending 30% of their day reconciling and validating the data from analytics and reporting. This was a tens of millions of dollars problem that takes away from the value of the HANA migration.
Thanks, Curtis. Let's now look at the SAP migration in an overview. There are 3 main layers: the database, business logic, and the UI. Supporting over 160 technologies out of the box, Tricentis covers all the various SAP and non-SAP user interfaces for end-to-end automation. On the business logic layer, we leverage our impact analysis to focus on the most important tests first, and automate via API where possible. Our data integrity component covers the first migration layer, focusing on testing data replication from ECC to HANA. And what is this data integrity component? Well, this is what we call Tosca Data Integrity or Tosca DI, and you will see it referred to in both ways. Here's an overview of Tosca Data Integrity. It's really the only solution on the market that does end-to-end automation across the enterprise data warehouse. We replace manual testing and long, complex SQL queries with scriptless, model-based automation. We cover all different types of tests, like from reconciliation to validation, across your warehouse, reporting, all your visualizations, all of this is covered with our solution. We have a wizard-driven approach for creating and maintaining a lot of this automation, which can really be leveraged by anyone within your team. So we're really eliminating a lot of the manual testing for these high-impact data use cases. And we can cover a lot of the use cases like structured and unstructured message data as well. So let's have a quick preview of Tosca DI conducting a reconciliation test from ECC to HANA. And what I'm going to do is run a quick recording of Tosca DI. You can see there's a ribbon at the top, which has different buttons where we can start the actual wizard to create and maintain our tests. Here we're going to actually start a row-by-row comparison, entering all our information to connect to our BW warehouse. We can connect, this is the environment we're actually looking at in this example. We can connect via the warehouse with a native connection, or we can go through the ODBC drivers as well. But once we're here, we can enter the catalog and info providers, select the dimensions, and get a preview of the actual tables and flatten that structure. We can export it to a file as a baseline to reuse again, or we can point to a data source, another data source like the target, and to do that comparison. And here you can see some different examples. You can pause the recording later and go into them, but you're going to see a quick example here where we go from ECC to HANA. We've connected to ECC by Oracle ODBC connection. We have an editor where we can run queries for a table, map the different columns from source to target. If there's any changes, we can cover a lot of these transformations without doing SQL querying. And then you can see the actual info provider view over there for the actual target that we're comparing to. You can see we can do different trimmings and options within the actual columns. Again, no SQL querying there. And we can create these nice business readable reports at the end that you can see to compare running reconciliation from source to target. And it's a nice out of the tool report in HTML format, so you can see exactly what differences or where some data was only in the source and not in the target. And here's a quick preview of that. We had about 100 different errors in a particular column. We can go through and say where the actual differences, line by line from source to target. See here there's a formatting issue, so that wasn't taken care of, which we can cover out of the box, but it's a nice example to see the actual differences from source to target. And we can see where data only exists in the source, not in the target, and a number of other options over there. So a very quick sneak preview of the actual product, but love to dive into more detail with any of you if you're interested from that side. But now let's move over into our Q&A part of the session, where we can hear your questions directly and do our best to answer them. So I'll take the first one because I was hoping this question would come up. It says, Salesforce announced a new analytics output connector for Snowflake. How does your tool work with this? So yes, we also saw that announcement earlier in this month, and we're really excited about this. For everyone else, this is the next level of partnership between Snowflake and Salesforce. They have a new integration that allows you to seamlessly move data from Salesforce into Snowflake. From our side, where we already fully support Salesforce and Snowflake. We've even got our own engine built for Salesforce in particular. Love to show that to you guys. So anyone using the setup can use Tosca DI to cover this end-to-end testing from Snowflake into Salesforce, as well as the reporting layer if you decide to go for Tableau or any other reporting tool. So we can cover all that. So the next one I kind of touched on during the session, but I'll let Curtis take this one.
Yes, I'll take this one. In Snowflake, can you use specific Snowflake-only commands like undrop in your tool? Yes, for example, once we see an issue in the migration, we can copy the data back using the metadata and undrop without ever really copying the physical data that's stored in the micropartitions within Snowflake. Uh, this works great for ongoing ETL testing after the migration, of course, also.
So I'll take this one. It says, what about performance of testing Snowflake migrations? So we have one example where we can share. We're working with a customer at the moment where they're migrating from Netezza to Snowflake. And one of the tests they're running at the moment, quite often, is they do a full row by row comparison. It's over 5 million records with over 230 columns, and it just runs in about 55 minutes. So we can handle any amount of data, really. We have an in-memory caching execution engine that handles this and runs it in a pretty efficient time frame. I'll get the next one as well. It says, can the tests from the migration be tied into a CI/CD type tool for the ability to utilize as regression tests post-migration? Yes, and that's really what we want to do. We can integrate the Tosca DI tests into your build tool so they run as part of your pipeline. And we support all the tools out there like Azure DevOps, Jenkins, Bamboo, whatever you might be using from that side.
Here's a question I hoped would come up. Can you share the 48 measures of data quality you talked about? Yes, we'll be happy to with anyone who sends us a request for a deeper dive after this webinar and gives us a chance to show some of the detailed features of Tosca DI for your data integrity. We'll give you a planning worksheet with them in it. This is just a part of what we do at Tricentis. We are focused on your success while utilizing our automation platform, and we're with you throughout the entire process.
Okay, I think we can take one more. What is the overall time frame for setting up a migration testing plan? So this really depends. It changes per customer based on their teams and their timelines. But generally, we're looking at a few weeks of effort to set up the overall plan, train your team before we start the testing itself from that side. So we have a whole academy and an implementation team that helps with that. So I see there's a lot more questions we didn't get to, but we will go through them and get back to you as email, like we mentioned. We can do that. On our website, you'll also find some contact details, so you can send through any other questions after the session, and we're happy to set up a call for more information, run through a demo. We'd love to be able to show you Tosca DI in more detail so you can see it in action. But thanks to everyone for participating today and joining our session. We're looking forward to hearing from you and working with you in the future. Thanks.